Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Unboxing Russia, the last one in this year, with me, Pradnya, and Ekaterina. And today we are going to talk about a variety of things, which we thought can be brilliantly named as friends, family, and others.
Which is a very Christmassy subject.
Exactly.
Family reunions. Old friends meeting in old places and leaving their homes for the sake of this reunion. Sudden changes, Christmas surprises, people being rewarded for good behavior or bad behavior, whichever side you look at, by unexpected appointments.
And obsession with people who are
and
probably or not really present on the horizon of whatever's happening. So we'll jump right into the conversation, talking about family
mysterious
reunions.
old man making havoc in another country's parliament.
Yeah, that's the hope that you have for yourself at the age of 93. So maybe I've given away a spoiler. But let's go back to the family reunion conversation.
The family reunion in Moscow. The former Syrian dictator making it alive out of Syria with his whole family, where actually his eldest son has been studying already for a long time. Quite recently, he got his candidate's degree in one of Moscow's universities. So if things do change in another 24 years, here's the heir-elect, properly educated and kept safe and sound in a friendly capital.
But let's go back a little bit for the uninitiated. So we know that Mr. Assad is a good friend / family of Moscow, if not directly Mr. Putin. Who knows?
I'm not sure about family, but he's certainly been a highly
extended family.
Highly valued in the sense of very expansive ally.
So what we see right now is the pinnacle of the relationship that has survived over the past decades. So maybe you could shed some light on that relationship, even if I know that you don't like to talk about issues that are foreign policy strictly, but this is of interest, and I'm sure you have a lot to say.
Yes, in order not to overstep the borders of my professional sphere, I will keep strictly to speaking about Moscow perceptions of the Syrian situation in Russia, and of the possible rationale of Moscow having acted as it did towards the Syrian regime over the years. The current Russian political system has inherited from Soviet Union a certain role of, if not of international troublemaker, at least a kind of self-imposed duty to have a finger in as many pies as they have fingers, or as they have the length of hand to reach those pies. When Soviet Union was a geopolitical player, its bounded duty was to counter American influence with the promise of socialist and communist future to those countries that would choose that path, together with choosing substantial monetary and military help and assistance of the Soviet Union. Russia has much smaller resources. Russia has much less opportunities to extend its influence worldwide. And what is perhaps equally important, Russia of today does not have the same all-enveloping proposal that Soviet Union had. So we don't have an alternative future to offer to other countries. So
in Mr. Putin's world, maybe.
He kind of tries to make up on the go this sort of alternative. But when you come to look at it, it is not a full-fledged ideological structure in a sense that, again, this is not always a good thing to have a full-fledged, a fully constructed ideological creation. Communism was such a structure, fascism was such a one. So it's not always a proposition for the good of humanity, but it has a certain harmony and self-sufficiency. It has ideology. It has a picture of the past, the explanation of why certain phases of human development succeed each other, and the promise for the future. Russia can't offer anything of this kind. When you look, again, in more detail at this ideology on the go, it boils down to anti-Americanism. So America is perceived as an unjust monopolizer of geopolitical forces, as a country that wants to order the world according to its own interests, and Russia is against this. Whatever Russia is for is not that clear. The idea of polyphonic world order is the newest invention. When I spoke about ideology on the go, this is exactly what I mean. Today we have one meme-worthy, clickbaity title that seeks to explain what Russia wants. Next week it will be something else. This polyphonia thing, this sudden, rather unexpected musical metaphor is the newest creation. Before that we had, what did we have? Polycentric world order or whatever. The essence is that America should not be ordering other countries around and calling the shots.
And Russia sees itself in that role to kind of make sure that there's an opposition to the American attempt to influence.
Sometimes Russia tries to position itself, at least rhetorically, as the alternative pole of this desirable world structure.
The reality right now may be pointing more towards China, but that's another conversation.
Yes, sometimes it tries to position itself as a leader of the more or less imaginary global South League, which again sounds quite familiar to people who've been watching Soviet time TV shows on international relations, and that was the movement of the independent countries, those countries that did not want to join either
non-alignment
Yes,
movement.
the non-alignment movement. But again, for a non-alignment movement to exist, there needed to exist, previous to that, those two camps, which is not the case today. However, still Russia thinks that whenever there's a place where something is going on, it's better for our country to be a player, to be an actor on that scene. Whether it's for the country's best interests or not is not the question that the leadership asks either of its people or of itself. Whenever there's something going on, we need to be there as well. Why? To show the Americans. So, driven by that highly rational incentive, in 2015, Russia decided to support Bashar Assad's regime when they started to almost fall victim to the internal turmoil. We will not go into discussing the details of Syrian civil war. Suffice it to say that Russian help has evidently prolonged the days of this regime for another 9 years, for another decade, during which decade Syria became, I think, much more of a failed state when it was 10 years ago.
It got worse.
It evidently got worse. If you look at the GDP dynamics, if you look at the electricity supply, if you look at the body count, whichever side you look, you could perhaps argue that had Assad fallen 9 or 10 years ago, chaos would have succeeded at that time, and then things could have been worse.
Also, sitting here in Germany, the number of people who left Syria as an immediate effect or after effect of the civil war in Syria, and they moved to Europe. A lot of them came to Germany, so I think it also had implications for Europe.
Yes. Hundreds of thousands of people left Syria since 2015. This resulted in a major refugee crisis here in Europe and specifically in Germany. Were you here on the ground in 2015?
I was, but I think there's also a perception of I would not go to the extent of calling it a refugee crisis. There was an influx of refugees, which was sizable, but I think it wasn't anywhere close to it being referred to as a crisis. I think there were other countries on the way between Syria and Germany, which were absorbing a bigger pressure of refugees who either stayed on or were accommodated into the refugee camps. But going back to that conversation, I think Germany did take in a lot of refugees based on its very popular one sentence that Angela Merkel said, "Wir schaffen das, we will make it." And that is one sentence that defined the history or the trajectory of German politics from that point on, because that was also a point of time in history where the AfD, which is a far-right political party, Alternative for Germany or Alternative für Deutschland, was almost on the verge of, they were facing sort of an existential crisis, and had Merkel not decided to throw the borders open for refugees coming in, they wouldn't be around to tell the tale for a longer time. And she said that sentence, she opened the borders. And that kind of fed into this extreme right, anti-immigrant rhetoric, anti-migration stance of the far-right party, which now will become very relevant going forward because Germany goes to elections in February. And the AfD is right now one of the strongest parties. They may not, they will not make it to an absolute majority, but they will have a very big chunk in the German parliament. So just saying that this internal domestic affairs versus external affairs doesn't really have to be looked at in a segregated fashion, because what was happening within Syria had its implications in the long term to what is happening in these parts of the world as well.
So without stretching the point too far, we can perhaps say that by upholding Syrian regime for another decade, Russia has also managed to strengthen the far-right parties in Europe, including
But that's
Germany.
what you've also been saying, right? Like the long-term game of Russia is to destabilize the region, and not just like one particular country, but to destabilize structures, to destabilize functional systems. And that is what it has managed by this time. I don't think it was the goal that they were aiming at when it happened.
I don't think it was the calculation.
But it worked out.
But it was the effect.
It worked out well for them, in a way.
Well,
well is in air
yes.
quotes, but
if it is indeed to the best interests of Russia to try to destabilize international order, of which, after all, our country has been so much a beneficiary. The idea that order based on rules is somehow bad for Russia is, for me, one of the greatest mysteries of today's official discourse. Why is that, and what are exactly the disadvantages of order and the advantages of chaos has never been made clear. Speaking of refugees, it is now an interesting point in the history of Syrian diaspora. Many of those refugees were just people fleeing
persecution and
the
civil
failed
war.
state situation, but some of them were politically driven. So they were people persecuted specifically by the Syrian regime. Yesterday, a few days ago, there were celebrations here in Berlin.
Across, I think, Europe, wherever there's a sizable Syrian
we can speak about Berlin while we're here. And we Russians were looking on enviously, because it's a downfall of the regime, but not the one that we perhaps would like to see.
But did you also have a sense of, I wouldn't say embarrassment, but in a way, like where you're thinking, not only we as a state, Russian state, have managed to, impose a war on a neighbor, an uncalled war, and now we've also managed to support a ruler, a dictator, for over a decade and have provided him safe haven to come to Moscow after creating the huge amount of destruction and ruckus that he did back in Syria.
On the last point of his making it to Moscow alive with his whole family, I didn't feel particularly embarrassed. First, it is indeed a humanitarian concern. We have had dictators killed. We have seen it in many parts of the world, including Middle East. It feels immensely satisfactory at the moment, but afterwards it is not conducive to the chances and possibilities of a democratic transfer. There's scholarly evidence about it. Statistically, if you kill your dictator, again, no matter how good it feels at the moment, it actually lessens your country's chances for democratic transit.
So, for long-term democratic transition.
Yes. Why? Not because the blood of the tyrant should not soil your native ground, but because if you kill an autocrat, it logically conducts to rooting out his clan, and rooting out an alternative clan creates a zero-sum game situation, which is bad for your future policy making. In whatever way the regime had fallen, it is to the interests of everybody left alive to compromise and cooperate, rather than create again the winner takes it all situation, because that was your previous situation. The dictator acted this way by monopolizing resources, rooting out opposition, stifling any alternative voices. That was the policies that eventually led to his downfall. So by recreating this situation, even if you start from the point of delivering justice, you all too quickly proceed to becoming the same type of leader yourself. So let him stay alive in Moscow, in the lumber room of ex-dictators. We have quite a few people in the same position hiding in Russia. The former Ukrainian president, Yanukovych, is living either in Rostov-upon-Don or somewhere in the Moscow region. Quite a few of the former leaders of Kyrgyzstan, and by the way, at least one former Armenian president, are reported to be living in Moscow. So what? They won't eat up all the food out there. We can, to quote Frau Merkel, we can afford it. It is better than having another corpse on a gibbet or another dismembered body like in Libya. Again, it makes an educational picture, but it's not good for the future of the nation. So let him stay there. I do think he managed to smuggle a few suitcases of cash and gold. That's what dictators usually think about first. It appeared that his family has been buying luxury real estate in one of the central districts of Moscow. I can't say it's okay to behave in this way when you are ruling over a ruined country, but that's what they do. And if it was the worst thing they do, I think, again, nations would have been okay even with that. But unfortunately, they do much, much worse things. So
I'm having this very grim expression right now because I think
you want justice.
No, I think it's also a difficult conversation between what will bring more peace in the long run. If the sense for justice, to look at what happened in the past and seek that justice, or if you say, I want to look into the future and start on a fresh slate. And I think I find it very difficult sometimes to leave the emotion out of it, because handing over such a tyrant, to allowing him to let go and not hold him accountable for the crimes he's committed on the ground, is something which is very difficult for a lot of people to swallow and to live with that there is this person, like you said, who is going around in Moscow property shopping and behaving as if nothing much has happened. I think it sits at the crux of a lot of democratic/non-democratic discussions that happen around the world.
That is also true. The history of impunity is a bad thing as well. But in a situation of violent regime change, of the country's capital falling down before armed forces, you don't have much hope for justice. You have much more space for revenge. I do hope that eventually he'll make it to The Hague or to whatever capital of...
You want it to be a procedure.
In international justice procedure may happen at. But we all, I think, understand that had he stayed in the country, he'd be killed. He'd be murdered, not imprisoned and brought to court. But you need to, in a post-regime change rebuilding of the country's national system, and that's the hardest phase of all, you need to strike a very difficult balance between let's kill them all because they did horrible things. Oh, yes, they did. And let's bygones be bygones, which is also a bad thing. We Russians have fallen into the other extremity back in the late 80s, early 90s. We have got rid of the Communist Party. Now we are a free country. Let's enrich ourselves and make merry. Let's
start on a clean slate.
Yes, let's start on a clean slate. Let's not rake up the past. Let us not risk a new civil war or at least civic disagreement in the society. So our first president, Boris Yeltsin, was not a vindictive person, which was extremely good for, for many people. He pardoned his political enemies easily, unlike his successor. But in that mood, and perhaps having the need to use the old nomenclatura to help him with his hold on power, he stopped the possible judicial proceedings against the Communist Party as a criminal organization. And what turned out to have even worse consequences, the KGB, the Soviet political police, was not properly
Dismantled, yeah.
And it had to be.
So it came back with a vengeance.
Yes. Yes. So you see, it's complicated. It's always complicated. But again, immediate murder of the previous leader is a thing perhaps to be fondly imagined, but it has its price, and it's not worth the price. The pleasure is not worth it. The pleasure is for the moment, but the consequences are more lasting. So, coming back to your question about feeling embarrassed. Yes, Russia's position as an international troublemaker is certainly much more than an embarrassment. It's frankly speaking a crime. We are supporting the nastiest regimes we can find. And what is even worse to swallow for Russian, we are spending so much money in it. Here we have inherited Soviet Union appetites without Soviet Union's resources. We are giving and giving and giving. The amount of money that Russian Federation every budgetary year is sending to Cuba are hard to imagine. Actually, among all the foreign countries, at least last time I checked, Cuba was the largest recipient of financial help. And this does not return to Russia in any forms, not even rum and cigars, nothing. The amount of money spent on Syria there have been attempts at calculating it. The loss, but I won't even start trying to do my own estimation. Yes. The loss of life. The number of people who got killed, regular army soldiers and officers, and even people from Wagner, from the private military company. Actually, on Syria's fields, the formerly minor battalion fattened itself into a big, sizable private army. And by fattening itself, I mean actually getting a habit of bloody impunity, killing people who for them were not even people properly, in a country where there's no oversight and no fear of justice, even according to Russian standards. And these nice habits they brought back, first to Ukraine and then to Russia. So you see how it all comes back to bite you. You can't contain evil. You can't just give evil a little place to play in, somewhere far away in a desert where wild people live. But us, proper people, good people, the white people, we should be safe from this kind of thing. Now it will come back. It will knock at your door. It will blow up your home. So don't. And no countries should actually be doing it. And if you have to do it, if you have to position a certain number of your people somewhere else, take care that they don't go wild. Actually, this is the primary experience of colonialism. You think that you impose violence on somebody else, but then
and get away with it.
Yes, but then those people who did those things, they come back.
They actually rise from the dead in a way.
The dead also come back to bite you. They exert unexpected revenge. So we're waxing moralistic and philosophical at the same time.
No, but talking about evil and all the moral
that's our scary Christmas tale. Little boys and girls, don't do bad things. The retribution will come in a very real way. Please don't stray from the paths of virtue.
No, but also I think it's also a moment to talk about because you said evil, and there is the evil. I think there can be some consensus about what is evil and what is not evil, and then there is the perception of evil, which is debatable, to put it very
A
mildly.
perceived threat.
A perceived threat.
Again, something you scare children with.
Yeah,
A
but
ghost that lives under the bed.
exactly. But the older they get, they start questioning the premise. And I think
You mean the children?
Yeah, yeah, and I think I'm using this metaphor to kind of segue into the persona or the icon that is George Soros, and how he has kind of
What has he done now?
no, because he's been in the center of a lot
A
of
bad old man.
in the center of a controversy that has, like really brought out the most colorful side, to put it very mildly, in the Indian Parliament right now.
All right. So George Soros is being discussed in the Indian Parliament, right?
He's not only being discussed, he's also leading to a lot of disruption in the Indian Parliament.
Has he been summoned to appear on a parliamentary hearing?
No. So the thing is, there is a lot of mudslinging happening between the ruling party and the opposition, based on the. So let's go back 2 steps. So the opposition, which is the Congress party, had alleged the current government to be in cahoots with the businessman Gautam Adani, who is one of the billionaires, like one of the most richest people on the face of this earth, and also perceived to be very close to the government.
Indian millionaires are the most millionaire ones.
Yeah. At the moment, yes. And he is
They get
supposed
the
to
most
be.
bang for their buck.
They
That's
do.
what makes them famous.
They do, but I think they also know how to party.
Yeah.
This
can
is like
put up a show.
a side note, because I think a lot of people must have followed the wedding of Mr. Ambani's son a few months ago. But anyway, that on
Even
the
I
side
have
note.
heard about it.
See, and that's on the side note. But going back to Mr. Adani.
So who sang at the wedding?
Amongst other people, I think there was Beyonce. But again, going back to Mr. Adani, he is supposed to be he's supposed to have very good relations with the current federal government. And because this allegation was then placed on the floor, saying that, Mr. Adani and Mr. Modi, or the current government in power, are in bed with each other, and Mr. Adani is being accused of a lot of corruption from different sources across the world, that created a lot of ruckus on the floor of the parliament.
So is he a kind of Elon Musk to your native Donald Trump?
I think Elon Musk is sometimes just very brutish, and he doesn't really think it through. I would say, in my perception, Mr. Adani is someone who's very shrewd, who doesn't like to be in the middle of things. He's the kingmaker in a way.
So he's not the one posting things on Twitter.
No, or rarely so. I don't even know if he has a Twitter account, but he's the opposite of Elon Musk, because Elon Musk likes this publicity. He likes to be in the center of things, and so on and so forth. So then, as a retaliation, the government then cited a report by a French media outlet which said that the opposition, led by Mr. Rahul Gandhi, the great-grandson of Jawaharlal Nehru, has very close ties with George Soros, through the Open Society Foundation's channel, and through their connection to one of the foundations that is supposed to have links with an organization that promotes the secession of Kashmir from the Union of India. George Soros is trying, through Rahul Gandhi, to create internal disruption within India.
So George Soros, aged 93, is funding separatist movements in India. Why should he do that?
Because apparently, and this has been a conversation, because I think a year or 2 ago at the Munich Security Conference, Mr. Soros also called out Mr. Modi directly. And he said Mr. Modi will have to provide answers to how he's treating the minority and so on and so forth. So I think the conversations aside, because I think George Soros himself is also a very controversial figure through the disruptions he's caused in economies and Bank of England, Thailand, and
that was like 30 years ago.
No, but still, I'm just saying, this is something that keeps coming up.
Yeah, he's an emblematic figure of evil for Russian official public discourse as well.
So now it's leading to this massive disruption.
So in India, he's trying to divide a region from the body of the country.
At the domestic level. So this is foreign involvement in domestic affairs.
Foreign interference.
And that's what I meant with the perception of evil. And okay, you have an issue with Mr. George Soros, bring it up in the parliament and leave it at that. Like, have a debate like grown-ups.
But what actually happened? Was there a fight?
Oh, I think there's just a lot of yelling and like walkouts, and people are like super, how do you say, like it's a school fight in a way in the backyard with lots of like brutish bullies just wanting to bully each other. So like, that's what I said, that it's brought out a very colorful side of the Indian parliamentarians.
Only the national budget pays for it.
Where you watch it and you think, oh wow, like the future of my country is in the hands of this 540 people, and I don't think that's a very promising prospect.
But they were not all yelling at each other, not all 500.
No, but I think the majority of them were. So it doesn't really make a difference, because by not saying much, you're also party to, you're not taking a stance. But the ones who are taking a stance, their stance is questionable for multiple reasons on both sides of the spectrum. So it's all a mess, to put it very bluntly. And Mr. Soros, who's nowhere on the scene.
I hope he's aware of the disturbance he has created.
I'm sure he is.
So he must be proud of it.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, that's the kind of influence you wish to yield when you're 93.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. To have people fighting about me in a parliament in a faraway country is, I think, the
biggest parliament
yes,
in the
of
world.
Anyone's ambition. So, speaking about people whom you don't want to be handling your country's future, there was one other appointment in Russia recently.
Also the family and friends.
Yes, family, friends, and the others. So it was, again, one of the weirdest bits of news that I have ever seen. Perhaps it has impressed me so much because I'm a former state servant myself, so I watch appointments. I kind of understand the mechanics of these appointments. So whenever something so strange as the thing that I'm going to describe happens, I'm at a loss to understand the rationale behind it. I can come up with half a dozen explanations, of course. It's not about explaining, it's about understanding. So, what happened? Whatever happened in the Kursk region of Russia. This is a southern oblast, a region, a subject of the Russian Federation, that had since August experienced what is called in official language an incursion of Ukrainian armed forces. So a sizable part of this oblast, of this region, is still occupied by Ukrainian army. In Kursk, again, Kursk is a region south of Moscow. It's even south of Tula. So if you look at the map, you have Moscow, then a bit southern, to the southern side you have Tula, and then still lower you have Oryol and Kursk, and then there's Belgorod, and then Ukraine. So it's an agricultural, pretty conservative, before the war, decently rich and quiet region of Russia. Again, its main concern is agriculture. I think that if we had real elections, then regions like that would elect conservative, rather right politicians, and I think that Russian Orthodox Church would have been influential there. But that in a case if we had real elections, which was not the case. So the region had a governor who has been there. He was a local. He had a career in regional civil service for some years. Then he went, as the custom is, to Moscow region and held a number of positions in the government there. And then he returned to his native oblast as a governor. You know that de jure Russian governors are elected, but the president proposes the candidate. So it's what my colleagues call a plebiscitary type of elections, when you don't make a choice, you just express your agreement with the choice made by the president. So this now it's former governor was there by 2022. Then the war started. Kursk was a bit better off than, for example, Belgorod. It was not at that time strictly a frontline region, but it was pretty close. So it was a difficult place to occupy. What was interesting about that governor, his name was and is Starovoyt, is that he allied himself with the Wagner group. He was one of the greatest friends of Prigozhin among the governors. Wagner had its base there, they had their training camps, and the governor even went and spent a month in that training camp in order to, train himself.
To train.
Evidently, yes. So, after the presidential elections, the electoral event of 2024, this governor of Kursk was promoted to be the minister, the federal minister of transportation. So, he left for Moscow, which is a dream career for any governor. It doesn't happen that often. You have much higher chances of getting arrested than of getting promoted if you're a governor. So, his deputy was left on the ground, who was also a local. And he was duly elected with a substantial but modest 65% of votes. Only this, I think, this spring, yes, so in March, the former governor left. So in like 90 days, they had elections, and this deputy guy, his name was Andrei Smirnov, was re-elected. The trick, if you're organizing your own elections as a regional governor, is that, of course, you need to be elected in the first round. That goes without saying. And you have to have a substantial turnout and percentage of votes. But that is the easy part. The difficult part is this. You should not allow yourself to get more votes than the president got in your region. That would create a false impression. So he played that trick, which means that he could manage the regional system. But in less than 6 months' time, suddenly, he was officially reported to have stepped down by his own will, without a shadow of an explanation, just whether he felt ill or whatever. So he stepped down, and he was replaced by, again, the weirdest possible candidate, a former State Duma deputy, former chair of the Committee of Informational Policies, and a former, one could hardly call him journalist. I don't know if you have this type in India. A person attached to some media who is really connected with a security body, receives information from them and publishes it. We have a lot of terms in Russian for that kind of job, but they're all highly indecent. I don't know how to properly explain it. But he was at that job for like decades. Formerly, he was connected with the General Prosecutor's Office. Then he was connected with the National Guard. Briefly, for 2 years, he served as a press secretary to the head of the National Guard, Viktor Zolotov. So the name of this new appointee is Alexander Hinstein. His reputation is not just at the 0 point, it's strictly negative. He is known to be the channel through which law enforcement passes the information that they need to be publishing. He's known to be, well, eager to grasp at anything. He's an ethnic Jew. He has a shady reputation in many other aspects. So he has been almost detained for making a row on the airplane when drunk. You can imagine the type. As a journalist of sorts with a scandalous reputation, such people can exist. There is a sort of social space for that kind of person. As a State Duma deputy, again, you have more than 500 people in your lower chamber. We have 450. That is not so bad. Deputies are for making public noises, after all. But as a governor in a region which is partially occupied, which is now on the front line, or indeed behind the front line, in a very conservative agricultural region where people have been protesting now at that moment, they've been protesting against the way regional authorities have been treating the refugees. To send such a person is an open insult. I know that this is the thing autocracies do. They need henchmen who are universally hated. They need people whose loyalty
Sometimes
is
they just need
ensured.
puppets.
Puppets to do what?
To not question anything that they are being told to do.
Maybe to serve as the front behind which
Exactly.
the deoccupation of the region will be happening. And we know
You
the
need
way...
someone for you to take the fall.
Yes, perhaps. That is, again, a more or less rational explanation. But even for this, wouldn't the previous governor have served as well?
Maybe he has a better job waiting for him. We'll see.
Well, we don't really know. There have already been criminal investigation in the region because there were supposed to be a defense line there, and money have been allocated for that purpose. The money have been spent. The defense line has not materialized when Ukrainian forces appeared. Again, it was not exactly like the fall of Damascus, but pretty close to it. So I don't really think that the former administration of Kursk will have an easy time for it. If I were them, I would kind of try to dissolve myself in the environment. But
thankfully, you're not one of them.
Yeah. So many things to be thankful for at the beginning of the holidays. So this is the way an autocracy that has successfully detached itself from public opinion and the dependence
and
on
reality.
The electorate, and from reality, which inevitably follows, can make decisions which from the outside look absolutely absurd. Like, again, when I first heard about it, I thought it was a bad kind of joke. When you are still resource rich, when your grip on power is still strong, you can get away with things like that. But I do think they create unpleasant memories that will be held against you when you become weaker. And with that moral point, we, I think, will have to conclude our pre-Christmas episode full of, if not of hope, at least
it's full of cookies.
It's full of cookies and high morality.
That's why we put a cookie jar here.
Yes, it is not just a stage prop.
There are cookies in it.
It actually has cookies made by my esteemed colleague Pradnya, a person of many talents. I do not pretend to have had a hand in it, but you see, it's a real thing. It's eatable. We are going to eat it once the microphones are off. We advise you to do the same. To eat
Try
whatever,
to switch off. Don't consume news.
Don't. Lay your hands on whatever cookies you can reach and eat them. You have time enough for this.
It's a well-earned break for everyone.
Yes. Before Unboxing Russia returns, will it be a new season or the new season starts in September?
I don't know. I think we can call it a new season because we have a whole new person coming into the White House in January, and then that will...
January is going to be a month of presents. The hands out of presents to everyone and sundry. At least to those little boys and girls that have behaved well during the year.
And eaten lots of cookies.
They will be properly rewarded during January.
We will be back after the mid of January.
Of luck to everyone.
And a wonderful holiday season and a happy new year to wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you.